The office was finally quiet. Not the quiet of peace, but the hollow silence that follows a storm. 71,321 voices had gone home across the country that Christmas Eve, told their jobs were over. And in a corner office 42 stories above the city, the man who had just ended 200 of them sat alone in the dark. Then, a soft knock on his door. He expected no one. The security desk had confirmed the building was empty, every employee gone, some with a final paycheck, all with a shattered holiday. The man at the desk was Elias Thorne, CEO of Veridian Dynamics, architect of the evening's ruthless efficiency. He had stayed behind, he told himself, to face the silence he had created. But the knock was real. And when the door opened, it wasn't an assistant or a cleaner. It was a 3-year-old boy holding a gift. This is how a story about power and punishment becomes a story about a single, impossible question. To understand the knock, you first have to understand the calculus. Elias Thorne did not see 200 people that afternoon. He saw a line item, a necessary correction. The board had been clear for months. Fourth quarter projections were soft, investor patience was thinner than ice, and a strategic reduction in force was the only lever left to pull. They called it a holiday streamlining. The Human Resources Department, working from a template used by 42% of companies that year, advised that doing it before the new year avoided complicating benefits and, critically, annual bonus payouts. For the rank and file, at least, 82% of executives, the report noted, would still receive their bonuses. Elias approved the list. He did not look at the names. The meeting began at 3 p.m. in the third-floor conference room, a space called the solarium for its glass walls that now felt like a fishbowl. Department heads, their own hands trembling, were given packets and scripts. They had 1 hour to notify their teams before the building access codes were deactivated at 5 sharp. Security was instructed to be firm, but polite. Outplacement services would contact everyone after the new year. The system was designed for clinical, swift detachment. And it worked. By 4:45, the 42-story Veridian Tower was a monument to quiet efficiency. Elias remained in his office. He told his assistant to go home to her family. He wanted to sit with the decision, to own the silence he had engineered. He did not expect the silence to feel so heavy. What he did not see, what the line item could never capture, was Maria Flores packing her locker in the basement cafeteria. She had been a food service associate for 6 years. She arrived every morning at 5 a.m. to start the coffee urns and bake the first batches of pastries. She knew which vice president took his coffee black, which analyst needed a gluten-free muffin, and she had, on 3 occasions, quietly made a sandwich for the new intern who looked like they couldn't afford lunch. Her notice was a printed slip left on the stainless steel counter beside the industrial dishwasher. No meeting, no explanation. Her final paycheck would be deposited, it said. It did not mention the holiday bonus she had been counting on to buy her son Leo the balance bike he'd pointed to in every store window since October. She folded the slip, put it in her apron pocket, and finished wiping down her station. She left through the service entrance at 4:55. Her coat not quite warm enough for the December wind. Maria's world existed in the margins of the one Elias Thorne ruled. A 1-bedroom apartment a 40-minute bus ride away, where she and Leo shared the bedroom and the living room was also the kitchen. She was a master of precarious arithmetic. The rent, the childcare copay, the soaring cost of a gallon of milk. The Veridian job was the anchor. It provided health insurance and, just as vital, free childcare in the on-site Bright Horizon Center. It was why she could work. When that anchor was cut loose at 4:30 on December 24th, every other piece of her life began to tumble into freefall. She sat on the bus, staring at her phone, calculating how many weeks of savings she had. The answer was 2, maybe 3 if she skipped meals. The holidays were not a season of joy, they were a financial gauntlet. The average American family spends over $1,000 this time of year. Maria had budgeted $150. Now she had to reassign that money to rent. While Maria rode the bus into a deepening panic, Elias stood at his office window. The city lights twinkled, a grid of ordinary lives. He tried to feel the resolve that had carried him through the day. He had started this company 15 years ago in a garage. He knew every sacrifice, every sleepless night. This decision, as brutal as it was about saving the company, about preserving thousands of other jobs. He believed that. He had to believe that. But a study from the University of Cambridge kept floating into his mind, one he'd skimmed in a Business Digest. Individuals who lose their jobs are twice as likely to experience clinical anxiety and depression 6 months later. He pushed the thought aside. Business was not personal. That was the first rule. He poured a drink he didn't really want and turned away from the window. At that exact moment, Maria was unlocking her apartment door. Leo, her 3-year-old, launched himself at her legs from where her neighbor, Ms. Alma, had been watching him. "Mama, look, I maked a present," he shouted, his words tumbling out in a joyful rush. He held up a small, lumpy box wrapped in stolen aluminum foil and covered in a chaos of dinosaur stickers. He had made it at daycare. For the boss man, he explained. The one in the big office. He had seen Elias once, months ago, when his class took a tour of the tower to see the Where Mommy Works. The man had waved. Leo had decided he was important, and important people got presents at Christmas. Maria's heart, already cracked, shattered completely. She knelt, hugging him tight, smelling the crayon and baby shampoo in his hair. She didn't have the words to explain that the boss man was the reason there might not be Christmas at all. The plan had been simple, a quiet evening, maybe watching a Christmas movie, trying to fabricate normalcy. But a different kind of emergency intervened. Ms. Alma, her neighbor, knocked frantically just after 7. Her elderly husband had fallen. She needed help getting him to the car, to the emergency room. Could Maria watch her 2-year-old twins for just an hour? Of course. In the chaotic shuffle of coats and car keys and the visceral fear of a medical crisis, Maria's world narrowed to the immediate need. She settled the twins with toys, put on a cartoon, and focused on calming Ms. Alma. It was in this window of overwhelmed distraction, a span of maybe 90 seconds, that Leo saw his chance. His carefully wrapped gift was on the table. The boss man was at work. Mama was sad. In the flawless, mission-oriented logic of a 3-year-old, the solution was clear. He would deliver it. He put on his red sweater, the one he loved because it was Christmas-colored, picked up his gift, and walked out the apartment door. He knew the way to the big building. He and Mama did it every morning. He made it to the bus stop, held the hand of a stranger who assumed he was with someone, and boarded the number 7 downtown. He paid with a token he'd found in the couch, a treasure he'd been saving. The bus driver, busy with the holiday schedule, didn't question a small boy quietly taking a seat by the window. He rode 22 stops, clutching his foil-wrapped box, watching the city he knew transform into the glittering canyon of towers he associated with his mother. He got off at the right stop. He walked the 2 blocks to the Veridian Tower, a familiar beacon. The grand lobby was mostly dark, the security turnstiles still, but the main revolving door was unlocked for the cleaning crews. Leo pushed with all his weight, and it gave way. Inside, the night security guard was in the back office, reviewing the day's dismissal log. He didn't see the small figure in a red sweater pad across the vast marble floor and press the elevator call button. The elevator, still active for executive access, dinged softly and opened. Leo got in. He knew the button, the one with the number 4 and the 0. He had pressed it on the tour. The elevator ascended in a smooth, silent hum. It opened directly into the executive vestibule, which was dark and empty. At the end of a short hallway, a sliver of light spilled from under a single heavy door. Leo walked toward it. He did not hesitate. He did not knock. He simply pushed the door open. And there was Elias Thorne, silhouetted against the night skyline, turning from the window at the sound. For a long, suspended second, man and boy just looked at each other across an acre of polished floor. The child was impossibly small in the vast, cold office. His sweater was too big. His eyes were wide, but not with fear, with purpose. He held up the crumpled, sticker-covered box. "This is for you," Leo said, his voice clear in the absolute quiet. "Merry Christmas." Elias stared. His mind, a machine built for mergers and projections, scrambled to process the input. A child in his office on this night. The disconnect was so total it felt like a system failure. His first furious instinct was to call security to have this intrusion, this absurdity, removed. But the words died before they reached his throat, because he looked past the boy into the dimly lit hallway and saw no one. No angry parent, no escort. Just a 3-year-old, alone, 42 stories above the city, holding out a gift. And in that moment, the meticulously constructed wall between the line item and the life it represented developed its first hairline crack. The silence that followed was not the corporate quiet Elias was used to. It was alive, humming with the impossibility of the child in front of him. His first coherent thought was not a business one. It was primal, parental. How did you get here? Where is your mother? He took a slow step forward, then stopped, not wanting to scare him. Hello, Elias said, his voice unfamiliar to his own ears, softer than he'd used all day. What's your name? Leo, the boy said, his arm still extended, the foil-wrapped box glinting. I brought you a present for Christmas. Elias looked from the box to the boy's face to the empty hallway behind him. The security breach was catastrophic. A 3-year-old had navigated a locked skyscraper alone. The liability was astronomical. But beneath the surge of professional alarm, something else stirred, colder and deeper, a specific, chilling fear. This child had come from within the building, from the daycare, which meant his parent was or had been an employee. Leo, Elias repeated, kneeling slowly to bring himself to the boy's eye level. The parquet floor was hard against his knee. Where's your mommy? At home, Leo said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. With the twins, they're crying. I came on the bus. He said it with the pride of a great explorer. On the bus. The words painted a terrifying picture. A city at night, a lone child, a sequence of mundane miracles that had almost certainly gone wrong. Across town, that picture was developing in Maria Flores's mind in stark, panic-stricken detail. She had settled the twins, her neighbor's toddlers, with a snack. Only then, in the sudden lull, did the wrongness of the quiet register. Leo, she called, checking the bedroom, the bathroom, the closet he liked to hide in. Nothing. Her call became a shout, then a scream that startled the twins into fresh wails. She tore through the apartment, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The front door was unlocked. Not just unlatched, but slightly ajar. He had never done that before. Never. She flew into the hallway, down the 3 flights of stairs, bursting out into the cold night. Leo, her voice echoed off the brick of the apartment complex. No small figure in a red sweater. No answer. Her mind, trained by years of contingency planning, raced through possibilities. The park. Too far and dark. The corner store. He knew he wasn't allowed. And then, with the gut-punch certainty of a mother's intuition, she knew. The gift. He had talked all week about giving the boss man his present. She had nodded absently, her mind on bills, not understanding he was drafting a mission plan. She sprinted back upstairs, grabbed her phone and keys, shouting a frantic apology to the confused twins. She dialed 911 as she ran to her car. My son is missing. He's 3. I think he might try to go to the Viridian Tower downtown. In the office 42 stories up, Elias was trying to solve the same puzzle with less information. He had coaxed the box from Leo's hand with a promise to open it together in a moment. He placed it carefully on his desk, next to a crystal award for market innovation. He then led Leo to the small sofa in his sitting area. You rode the bus all by yourself? He asked, keeping his tone light, conversational. Leo nodded, kicking his feet. I used my special coin. The driver didn't see me. I'm sneaky. Elias felt a cold sweat break out under his suit jacket. He pulled out his phone, his thumb hovering over the security chief's number. But he paused. Calling security meant protocol. It meant reports, maybe police, a scene. It would define this child as an incident, a problem to be processed. Leo was looking at him now, not with fear, but with a calm, curious trust. He had achieved his objective. He was waiting for the thank you. Is your mommy's name in the computer? Leo asked suddenly, pointing to Elias' laptop. What do you mean, buddy? At your work, Mommy's name is in the computer. She works here. She makes the muffins. The words landed like precise, tiny blows. Makes the muffins. Food services. Cafeteria staff. A department that had been cut entirely in the afternoon, streamlining. Elia's stomach turned to lead. Put up, his movement stiff. Stay right here, Leo. I'm just going to look something up. He moved to his desk, waking his computer. His hands, which had signed the layoff orders without a tremor, now fumbled with the login. He accessed the terminated employee list from the HR portal, a document he had deliberately avoided all afternoon. He filtered for food and environmental services, 27 names. His eyes scanned them. Garcia Luis Patel Flores, Maria Flores. Termination effective 4 p.m. December 24th. Listed dependents, one child, Leo, age 3, authorized for on-site childcare. The air left Elias' lungs. He wasn't just looking at a lost child. He was looking at the direct, human consequence of a decision he had framed as a financial abstraction. This boy, sitting on his $7,000 sofa, had lost his childcare, his health care, and his family's financial stability because of a line item Elias had approved. The holiday streamlining had streamed right into his office and handed him a gift. A soft chime broke the silence. A security notification flashed on his screen. A 911 call had been logged by City Dispatch, flagged for the Viridian Tower address. A missing child report. Parent's name, Maria Flores. Action was the only antidote to the paralysis of guilt. Elias stood. He had to get Leo home now before this spiraled into a media catastrophe, and more importantly, before Maria Flores's terror lasted a second longer. But he couldn't just put him in a cab. The protocol-driven part of his brain, the part that had engineered the layoff, warred with a newer, more chaotic impulse: responsibility. "Leo," he said, returning to the sofa, "we need to go see your mom. She's worried about you." Leo's face fell. "But you didn't open the present." "We'll open it in the car, I promise." The word promise felt strange in his mouth. He never promised anything he couldn't contractually guarantee. He took Leo's hand. It was small and warm and fit entirely within his palm. They walked out of the corner office, past the dark workstations of his assistant and the strategy team, toward the private elevator. Elias used his fob. As the doors closed, sealing them in the quiet, descending box, Leo looked up at him. "My mommy was sad today," he said, his voice matter of fact. "She cried in the kitchen." Elias had no reply. The elevator descended in a hum that sounded like judgment. In the basement parking garage, Elias' black sedan was the only vehicle in the executive section. He helped Leo into the passenger seat, struggling with the unfamiliar mechanics of a child safety harness built into the leather. He finally secured it, his forehead damp with effort. As he slid into the driver's seat, his phone rang. It was Martin, the head of security. Elias answered on the car's speaker. "Mr. Thorne, we have an alert. Police have been notified of a possible missing child en route to our building. The mother is a recently terminated employee. We're locking down for a search." "Stand down, Martin," Elias said, his eyes on the road ahead as he pulled out of the garage. "The child is with me. I have him. He's safe." There was a long pause on the line, a silence filled with professional disbelief. "You have him, sir. How? What is the protocol here? Should I inform the police?" "I will handle the police. I am taking him home to his mother. Do not alert the media. Understood?" His voice was the old Elias Thorne voice, the one that expected compliance. "Understood." The line went dead. Beside him, Leo was quiet, watching the city lights streak by. He held the crumpled gift in his lap. "Where do you live?" Elias asked gently, navigating toward the neighborhood he knew from the employee address file. "In the yellow building, with the noisy pipe." The drive took 20 minutes. 20 minutes in which Elias Thorne, architect of a Christmas Eve mass layoff, sat beside the most vulnerable casualty of his decision. The radio was off. The only sound was Leo's soft breathing. Elias replayed the day's events from this new, devastating vantage point. The HR presentation about minimizing disruption. the legal review ensuring compliance with the WARN Act, which they'd skirted by keeping the layoff just under the threshold for advance notice. The careful language about transitioning. None of that language covered a 3-year-old's bus ride across the city. He pulled up to the yellow apartment building. It was clean but worn, a world away from the glass tower downtown. As he parked, he saw a woman standing on the front steps, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold, a police officer beside her, Maria Flores. Her face was a mask of pure anguish, etched in the harsh glow of a streetlight. When she saw the luxury car, her expression shifted to confusion. Then the passenger door opened and Leo tumbled out. "Mama." A sound escaped Maria, a sob of relief so profound it was almost silent. She dropped to her knees on the concrete, catching Leo as he ran into her arms, clutching him so tightly it seemed she might never let go. The police officer put a hand on his radio, eyeing Elias warily as he got out of the car. Elias stood there, a man in a navy three-piece suit on the cracked sidewalk of a neighborhood he'd never visited, exposed under the sodium vapor light. He was an intruder here, the architect of this woman's worst night. Maria looked up from Leo's hair, her eyes finding Elias. Recognition flickered in them, followed by a wave of shock, then a hardening into something like fury. She knew exactly who he was. "You," she said, the single word loaded with a lifetime of working for men who didn't see her. She stood up, keeping Leo behind her. "What did you do? Why did you have my son?" The police officer stepped forward. "Sir, can you explain your relationship to this child?" This was the moment for the corporate script. He could say he'd found the child wandering the lobby, that security had brought him to his attention, that he'd acted as a responsible citizen. He could distance himself. It would be clean, professional, and a complete lie. Elias looked past the officer directly at Maria. He saw the exhaustion, the fear, the fierce love, and the anger that was her right. He thought of the line item with her name on it. He thought of the cold coffee in his empty office and the warm, trusting hand that had pulled him from it. "My name is Elias Thorne," he said, his voice clear in the cold air. He did not look at the officer. He kept his eyes on Maria. "I am Leo's mother's former employer, and tonight I believe I may have made the worst mistake of my life." For a heartbeat, there was only the sound of a distant siren and the cold December wind. Then the world rushed back in. The police officer, Officer Reyes according to his badge, shifted his stance, his hand moving subtly toward his belt. "Mr. Thorne, you need to explain yourself clearly. Did you take this child from the Viridian Tower?" "No," Elias said quickly, forcing his CEO composure to the surface. It was a thin veneer, but it held. "He arrived at my office alone. I found him there. I brought him straight home. You can confirm with my building security. I instructed them to stand down." Maria Flores's eyes never left Elias' face. The initial fury was cooling into something harder, more analytical. She was, Elias realized, assessing him as a threat. Her arms were still wrapped around Leo, who was peering out from behind her legs. "You fired me today," she said, her voice low and steady. It wasn't a question. Elias met her gaze. There was no point in denial. The food services division was eliminated. Yes. At 4 p.m. on Christmas Eve. She stated each fact like she was driving a nail. "You cut the access badges. You locked the daycare. You didn't even have a meeting. You left a note by the dishwasher." He had no defense. The clinical efficiency he had approved now sounded monstrous when recited in the cold on this sidewalk. The process was designed to be swift, to avoid us making a scene, Maria finished for him. She looked at the sleek black car, then back at his suit. "So what's this? Is this the scene?" Before he could answer, Leo tugged on her coat. "Mama, I gave him the present. He didn't open it yet." He pointed to the car. All eyes turned to the passenger seat, where the foil-wrapped box sat on the leather. In the tension, it seemed absurdly small. Elias walked back to the car, retrieved the box, and brought it over. He held it out to Leo. "You should open it with your mom," he said. But Leo shook his head, pushing it gently back toward Elias. "It's for you, open it." Under the watchful eyes of a police officer, a furious mother, and a growing number of curious neighbors peering from windows, Elias Thorne carefully peeled off the dinosaur stickers and unfolded the crumpled foil. Inside was a slightly melted chocolate bar from a vending machine and a drawing. On a piece of construction paper, Leo had drawn two stick figures. One was small, with a red scribble for a sweater. The other was tall, with black scribbles for hair, standing in front of a wobbly rectangle covered in yellow dots, a building with windows. Between them, he had drawn a lopsided heart in crayon. Elias stared at the drawing. The simplicity of it was a blade. This child had drawn a connection, a kindness. On the day, Elias had severed 200 others. Maria saw the drawing over his arm, her breath caught. Her anger seemed to falter for a second, replaced by a profound, weary sadness. "He talked about you all the time," she whispered, more to herself than to anyone. "After the tour, the boss man in the sky." She looked at Elias, her eyes glistening. "He didn't know what you did today. He just wanted to give you a Christmas present." Officer Reyes cleared his throat, his posture relaxing slightly. The story checked out. No crime had been committed by the CEO, just a staggering lapse in corporate responsibility and a frightening child's adventure. "Ma'am, your son is safe. That's the important thing. I'll need to file a report, but it seems Mr. Thorne acted to return him." He turned to Elias. "Sir, a word of advice. Get a better security system." As Officer Reyes walked back to his squad car to begin his paperwork, Elias and Maria were left in a fragile, awful silence. The wind picked up, cutting through Elias' suit. He was shivering, and it wasn't from the cold. "What happens now?" Maria asked, her voice hollow. "Leo's insurance ends in 30 days. The childcare is gone. I have maybe 3 weeks of rent. You didn't just fire me. You pulled the floor out from under my son's feet." She wasn't shouting anymore. The truth was too heavy for volume. Elias' mind, already reeling, tried to access a solution. Severance, outplacement, the standard packages. But he knew, looking at her face, that standard was the language of the line item. It wasn't enough. I will have human resources call you first thing tomorrow. We will expedite everything." Severance references. "Tomorrow is Christmas," Maria said, a bitter laugh escaping her. "No one is calling anyone tomorrow." She was right. The system he had built was offline for the holiday. It had delivered its trauma and then closed for business. He felt utterly useless. The power he wielded in a boardroom meant nothing here on this cracked pavement. "Then let me help you now," he heard himself say. He reached for his wallet, an instinctive, clumsy gesture. Maria's expression shut down completely. "Don't you dare," she hissed, stepping back as if from something toxic. "You don't get to hand me cash on my doorstep like I'm a charity case. You did this. You don't get to be the hero who fixes it with $100. Get in your car, Mr. Thorne. Go back to your tower. Just go." Her words were a dismissal more final than any boardroom vote. Elias stood frozen, the chocolate bar and drawing in his hand feeling like evidence of a crime. He nodded, a stiff, formal motion. "I am deeply sorry, Miss Flores, for everything." He turned and walked back to his car. As he opened the driver's door, he heard Leo's small voice call out, "Bye, boss man." Elias didn't turn around. He couldn't. He slid into the seat, started the engine, and drove away, leaving the scene in his rearview mirror, but he couldn't outdrive the feeling. The silent office he returned to an hour later was no longer a sanctuary of power. It was a crime scene. He sat at his desk, the drawing of the stick figures and the heart laid beside his keyboard. He pulled up the termination list again. This time, he didn't see titles and salaries. He tried to picture them. Maria Flores, making muffins. David Lewis, the night shift custodian who always had a word for the security guard. Annika Patel, who ran the salad bar. 200 stories. 200 families entering the holiday season with the ground falling away beneath them. He thought of the research that had floated through his mind earlier, the doubled rates of anxiety, the impact on children. It wasn't abstract data anymore. It had a face. It had a name. Leo. His phone buzzed. It was a text from Martin, head of security. "Sir, a note. The mother, Ms. Flores, did not make a formal complaint to the officer. The report will be classified as a lost child found safely. No media involvement at this time." She had protected him. Even in her rage, her first instinct had been to shield her child from a media circus, and in doing so, she had shielded Elia's too. The shame of that was hotter and more painful than any public scandal. Elias spent the night in his office. He didn't sleep. He stared at the city and then at the list. He thought about the 82% of executives who would still get their bonuses. He was one of them. A seven-figure deposit scheduled for January 2nd. He thought about Maria's savings lasting 3 weeks. When the gray light of Christmas morning finally crept over the city, Elias made a decision. It was not a fully formed plan. It was a direction. He couldn't undo what he had done, but the system that allowed it, that encouraged it, the system he led, was still in his hands. He showered in the executive suite, changed into a fresh shirt from his emergency closet, and at 8 a.m. he did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He went downstairs, bought 2 large coffees and a box of pastries from the only open cafe, and drove back to the yellow apartment building. He didn't know if she would answer. He didn't know if she would throw the coffee in his face, but he had to try. He had to look at the consequence, not in a report, but in the eye. He parked, took a deep breath, and walked to her door. He knocked. The door opened a crack held by a security chain. Maria's eyes, tired and wary, appeared in the gap. She didn't speak. "I'm not here with cash," Elias said, his voice quiet. He held up the coffees and the pastry box. "I'm not here with a solution. I don't have one. I'm here to listen, if you'll let me." Maria looked at him for a long time. Then, without a word, she closed the door. Elias' heart sank. But a second later, he heard the rattle of the chain. The door opened fully. She stood there, dressed in sweats, her hair pulled back. Behind her, Leo sat on the floor in his red sweater, building a fort with couch cushions. He looked up and waved. "5 minutes," Maria said, stepping aside to let him in. The apartment was warm and small and full of a life Elias Thorne had never paused to imagine. The smell of toast and baby shampoo, the couch with a blanket fort in progress, a tiny kitchen where every inch of counter space was used. He stood awkwardly just inside the door, holding the coffees like a peace offering. Maria took them, set them on the small table, and gestured to a chair. "5 minutes," she repeated, sitting across from him. Leo watched from his cushioned fortress, curious but quiet. Elias didn't know where to begin. All his boardroom eloquence had deserted him. "Tell me," he said finally, his voice rough. "Tell me what yesterday did, not to the department, to you." Maria looked at him, weighing his sincerity. She saw the same exhausted man from the night before, but the imperious mask was gone. In its place was a hollowed-out uncertainty. She decided to give him the truth, stripped bare. "You took away my son's doctor," she said, her voice flat. "His pediatrician is in network through Veridian. We have an appointment for his shots in January. That's now a $200 bill I don't have." She ticked it off on one finger. "You took away his school, the Bright Horizons Center. I have no backup care. I can't even go to a job interview without paying someone $20 an hour to watch him, which means I need a job that pays $25 an hour just to break even." A second finger. "You took away the only predictable thing in our life. I knew my route. I knew my hours. I knew I could afford rent on the 1st and groceries on the 15th. Now I know nothing except that my savings run out on January 15th. A third finger. She looked at her hand, then back at him. "You didn't fire a cafeteria worker, Mr. Thorne. You unraveled a safety net it took me 6 years to knit together." Each point landed with the quiet force of a fact. Elias listened. He didn't interrupt with solutions or excuses. He just absorbed the inventory of catastrophe he had authored. The swift transition was, in this living room, an avalanche of dominoes. "The severance package," he began, but the words felt pathetic even as he said them. "Is 1 month's pay," Maria finished. "After taxes, that's maybe $2,000. That covers January's rent. Then what?" She shook her head. "You people in your glass towers, you think a check fixes it. It doesn't fix the fear. It doesn't fix the feeling that you're one bad day away from falling through a crack so deep no one will hear you." Leo emerged from his fort and climbed into Maria's lap. He looked at Elias. "You sad too, boss man?" The question, so similar to the one that had broken through in another story about a lonely man, hung in the air. Elias found he couldn't lie to a 3-year-old. "Yes, Leo," he said quietly. "I think I am." Maria smoothed Leo's hair, her expression unreadable. The 5-minute mark had come and gone. "Why are you really here?" she asked. "Guilt doesn't help me pay bills." Elias took a deep breath. "I don't know," he admitted. It was the most honest thing he'd said in years. "I know I can't fix it with a check. I know an apology is worthless, but I saw the list. 200 names. I only know one story, yours. And if I don't listen to this one, I have no right to call myself a leader. I'm just a man who signs papers in the dark." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the drawing Leo had given him, now carefully smoothed flat. He placed it on the table. "This was the first Christmas gift I received this year, probably the only one that mattered. It came from the son of a woman I made disposable. That's not a paradox. That's a failure, my failure." Maria looked at the drawing, at the lopsided heart between the stick figures. Her tough exterior softened just a fraction. She saw not a CEO, but a man who was, for the first time, truly lost. "What are you going to do?" she asked, not with challenge but with genuine curiosity. "I don't have the whole plan," Elias said, "but I know the first step. The board approved executive bonuses. 82% of companies still pay them even during layoffs. My bonus is 7 figures. I'm redirecting it, all of it." The decision, which had been forming in the silent hours of the night, crystallized as he spoke it aloud. "It will become a transition fund for extended health care, for childcare vouchers, for retraining grants. It won't fix everything, but it's a start." Maria's eyes widened. This was not a PR gesture. This was a tangible, personal sacrifice. It was a signal. "And the other 199 people?" she asked. "They'll get a new package. One drafted after I've had coffee with as many of them as will talk to me," Elias said. "The process was inhumane. I can't undo the layoff, but I can undo the cruelty." He stayed for an hour. They didn't become friends. The chasm was too wide, but they established a truce built on brutal honesty. Elias asked questions and Maria answered them. She told him about the other women in the cafeteria, about the custodian with a sick wife, about the single father in shipping. She gave him the human data his spreadsheets had erased. When he left, Maria didn't thank him, but she didn't tell him to never come back either. She simply nodded as he left, a tacit acknowledgement that a line of communication, however fragile, was now open. What followed was the most unorthodox corporate turnaround in Veridian's history. Elias Thorne did not go on a media tour. He did not issue a press release about his change of heart. He quietly instructed his attorney to restructure his bonus. He called an emergency board meeting for December 27th. A call met with profound irritation and confusion. In that meeting, he did not ask for permission. He informed them of his actions and presented a new, comprehensive support protocol for the laid-off employees, funded initially by his foregone compensation. He cited the research on the mental health spiral of job loss, the impact on families, and the long-term brand toxicity of being known as the Christmas Eve Company. Some board members were furious, calling it emotional and bad business. Others, seeing the catastrophic PR disaster that had been narrowly averted by Maria's silence, were quietly relieved. They approved the measures, not out of compassion, but out of risk management. But Elias' transformation wasn't just about writing checks. True to his word, he began to meet people. He set up a small, anonymous office in a different building and invited every terminated employee to a one-on-one conversation. Few came at first. Distrust was total, but a handful did, driven by desperation or curiosity. He listened to their stories. He took notes, and he acted on them. He personally called in favors with competitor companies to place skilled workers. He connected a former IT analyst with a coding bootcamp scholarship. He discovered that David Lewis, the night custodian, had a talent for woodworking and helped him secure a small business loan. The news, of course, eventually leaked. A tweet from a spouse of a laid-off worker. After Christmas Eve nightmare, Veridian CEO actually doing right by my husband. New severance, 6mo healthcare, job placement help. What is happening? The business press pounced. Articles asked, is Elias Thorne's guilt trip a new PR strategy, or the redemption of a ruthless CEO? Elias gave one interview to a serious outlet. He didn't mention Leo by name, protecting the family's privacy. He simply said, I was confronted with the profound difference between a strategic decision and a human consequence. I failed to see the human consequence. Once you see it, you cannot unsee it. All I'm doing is trying to align our actions with what I now see. For Maria, the changes were concrete and life-altering. Her health care was extended for a full year. She received a retraining stipend. But the most surprising offer came 3 weeks into January. Elias' assistant called, not with a form letter but with a personal request. The company was revamping its community outreach program. They wanted to create a liaison role, someone who understood the needs of the city's workforce from the ground up. They were offering her the job. It paid more. It was stable, it came with childcare. Maria was suspicious. Was this guilt hearing a way to keep her quiet? She asked for a meeting with Elias. In his office, now in daylight, she asked him directly, is this a pity job? No, he said. It's a necessity job. We need someone who won't let us make the same mistake twice. Someone who will tell me and the board the truth we don't want to hear. I can think of no one more qualified to do that than you. She took the job. It was not a fairy tale ending. There were awkward moments, deep-seated resentments that took years to fade. But it was a new beginning built on a foundation of painful truth. And Leo, he became an occasional, delighted visitor to the big building, though now he visited his mother's new office, not the lonely corner suite on the 42nd floor. He called Elias boss man for a long time, until one day, shortly before he started kindergarten, he asked, can I just call you Elias? Elias, who had by then become an advocate for ethical downsizing protocols and corporate mental health responsibility, smiled. I'd like that very much, Leo. The final, surprising detail was not about grand gestures, but about a small, internal policy change that grew from that Christmas Eve. Elias instituted a mandatory consequence review for any future layoff plan. The heads of departments were required to meet, not with spreadsheets, but with profiles, anonymous case studies of the people who would be affected, detailing their dependencies, their financial pressures, their family situations. The goal was not to stop layoffs, but to force the decision makers to see the human architecture they were dismantling. It was nicknamed the Leo Protocol by a few senior managers, though no one ever explained the name to outsiders. It became the company's most powerful, if unspoken, check against pure corporate ruthlessness. The story doesn't end with a bow. Real ones never do. Maria still has days where the anger returns. Elias still wakes sometimes from dreams of a silent office and a small knock. But in that building and in that city, a lesson was learned not through a sermon, but through a child's drawing and a lonely bus ride. That power is not just about making decisions, but about having the courage to face what those decisions truly cost. And sometimes, the only person who can teach that lesson is the one you never expected to see standing at your door. So what do we take from a story like this? It's not a simple parable about a bad man made good. The world is more complicated than that. Elias Thorne didn't become a saint. Maria Flores didn't grant him easy forgiveness. The system that allows for Christmas Eve layoffs still exists in boardrooms across the country. 71,321 people faced that same hollow silence last November alone. But this story is about a crack in the wall. A single, fragile moment where the abstract language of business met the uncomplicated reality of a child's heart. It's about what happens when someone is forced to look, truly look, at the human architecture their decisions dismantle. We live in a world of systems, corporate systems, economic systems, systems designed for efficiency and scale. Those systems have a terrifying power. The power to make people into line items, to transform lives into liabilities, to frame cruelty as necessity. But this story whispers a question. What if every system had a Leo protocol? Not a rule book, but a principle, that before a final decision is made, someone must be forced to see the specific human faces it will affect, to hear the one story that makes the 200 real. Maybe your story isn't about a CEO or a layoff. Maybe it's about a time you were the one feeling invisible, or a time you wielded a power you didn't fully understand. Maybe it's about a moment when a small, unexpected kindness, a drawing, a bandage, a few words from someone who wasn't supposed to speak, changed the entire temperature of your world. Those are the stories that don't make the headlines, but they are the ones that change the current of a life. They remind us that behind every policy, every bottom line, every closed door, there is a human heartbeat. And sometimes, all it takes is one person refusing to be invisible, one child who doesn't know the rules, to make the powerful remember that. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you of a moment when humanity broke through the paperwork of life, then this channel is for you. We exist to tell these stories. Not the loud, shouting headlines, but the quiet, transformative ones. The ones that happen in offices after hours, on city buses, in apartments where the future feels fragile. Stories that ask us to see each other, really see each other. If you believe in the power of those stories, consider subscribing. Leave a comment below about a time a small moment challenged a big assumption in your life. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that change often starts with a single, unexpected knock. Thank you for listening, for staying with the story until the end. Remember, the most powerful protocols aren't written in handbooks. They are written in moments of courage, in acts of seeing, and in the simple, stubborn refusal to accept that anyone is just a line item. We'll see you in the next story.